My name is Maggie. I am a junior sociology and statistical and actuarial math major with a minor in gender and women's studies. We are so grateful to continue our day of learning with a session entitled Sexual Education as Violence Prevention. Remember to take care of yourself, take breaks, and grab snacks as needed. Our next presenter is another St. Mary's alumna, Vasquez. Mujeres provides medical advocacy crisis intervention, develops professional trainings and presentations for sexual violence prevention, advocates at the institutional level for survivors, and supervises volunteers and interns. As a first-generation American and student, Mujeres graduated from St. Mary's College with a bachelor's in gender and women's studies in August 2020. Today, Mujeres continues to work through advocacy and community engagement to prevent sexual violence in the Chicagoland area. Please welcome Vasquez.
Can you all hear me? Yay, thank you. All right, so like you said, I'm Vasquez. So I really wanted to start off presenting by explaining where I'm coming from. So I'm from Mujeres, Latinas, and Acción. I work in their sexual assault program as a training coordinator. And so our program has been around for, this will be our 51st year. So we've been in the community a long time. We're in Pilsen. And we started in the 1960s by a group of women in the community who really were seeing all the immigration issues and the gang violence and the domestic violence that was happening to the women. So they decided to start to create an organization for women in the community. And then in the early 1970s is when they got together, put all the resources together to really start Mujeres. And it was at a storefront. So in the 1975, when they really got the organization going, we didn't really have money until 1975 to really run it. And so what the women leaders would do, they would host rent parties at the storefront, which is this third picture that you're seeing. So they would host parties where people would come in and pay like a cover fee. And then that's how they make the rent and bills to pay for their services and for people to get help prior to getting funding. And then today, like I said, we just celebrated our 50th anniversary last year, which was huge for us. We've definitely expanded the services. Before it was just domestic violence. Now we have sexual assault, we have community engagement, we have a parent support program. We also have classes that are for women to learn how to be leaders in their community and how to be entrepreneurs and start their own small business. And all of our services are completely free. Prior to me starting this role, I was in another role where I was helping people become U.S. citizens. So we also do that. We just have a variety of services in our community that are free for everyone. A lot of people will see our name and think that it's only for Latin women, but the reality is it's for anyone at this point. Back then it was only for women, but we serve anyone in the community. And so that's just a gist of like where I'm coming from. Our website is there, so feel free to check us out and to learn more. But to get into the presentation for today, I really love that we already went over the power and control wheel, so thank you for that. But really understanding that sexual violence is based on power and control. We always tend to think that sexual violence is based on like what we were wearing, right? All these victim blaming ideas of what we were wearing, what we were doing, who were we with, right? If we were drinking or consuming any substances. But the reality is people that harm us in sexual violence are only doing so because of power and control. But really understanding that this is also a public health issue, which people will tend to not think about it that way, because public health really is focusing on like health, safety, and the well-being of populations, but sexual violence is that as well, right? And really thinking about the CDC, we get funding from the CDC, so I really will be implementing some other models throughout the presentation. But really understanding that the goal for CDC when they're thinking about sexual violence is to prevent sexual violence, is to stop it from happening. And with prevention, they're really looking at the factors that influence violence before it'll happen, but also like who are the people that are harming us. And again, I heard intersectionality being mentioned, which is really understanding that intersectionality is a huge thing when we're looking at sexual violence. It's really interrelated into public health because public health within itself is very intersectional. So understanding that there is a lot of intersectionality at play here too. So the first model I'm starting off with is the public health model. where it's designed by the CDC, so really understanding that there's like 4 key components to it. The first one is defining and monitoring the problem. So here we're really looking like who, what, when, where, why, how is sexual violence happening, by who's it affecting. We're really looking at data because data is really going to help us understand like who it is affecting and like who are the people that are harming us. When we're looking at identifying risk and protective factors, which I'll have a few slides on that as well, we're really understanding how, like, the first component, where we can put prevention efforts here and strategies to help sexual violence. And then the third one is developing and testing prevention strategies, where we'll be looking at data, how it'll help design prevention strategies that are really evidence-based focused, and I'll talk some of the programs that we use in our organization. And then the last thing is assure widespread adoption, which is once we have these evidence-based programs, how are we implementing into the communities? How are they, if they're being effective at all, right? And then we're doing this through training, technical assistance, and evaluations. At our organization, we get in order to be a certified rape crisis center is through the Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and they provide a lot of technical assistance for us too. But at the same time, us as an organization, we have grantees throughout the whole country that we're providing technical assistance to. So we are expanding nationally to provide like help to other like centers as well. And then the other model I have here is the socio-ecological model. Again, it's by the CDC. But really looking at how prevention is in each component of the model. So the first one we have that just overall the socio-ecological matter is like these 4 levels to better understand violence and the effect of potential prevention strategies. So the first one is individual. Of course, it's like how it's affecting each of us individually, our relationships, our communities, maybe societal factors. And so here we're really understanding how factors that put us at risk and protect us from sexual violence, like how it looks like, right? And so by looking at this part of the model, we're really understanding like how each level is really influenced by one another too. And so we're looking at the biological and personal factors that increase the likelihood of being survivors of sexual violence, but also being perpetrators of sexual violence. So this can be, for example, like age or education level or income level. Maybe if we have a history of substance use or we're currently using. And then here what prevention strategies will look like is promoting attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that prevent violence. So for an example, it would be like social emotional learning skills or safe dating skills programs, which again, I'll give an example of some of those programs I'm using now later. But then when we're looking at relationships, we're really looking at the relationships between each other and how it increased the risk of being survivors or being perpetrators of violence. And so here we'll see our relationships with families, with our partners, with our friends and other peers, and how these relationships will really influence our behaviors, like how we go and act with others, but also our experiences as we're navigating through life. Here, prevention programs will be obviously like strengthening family communication, having better peer norms with our friends or people we're interacting with, and then having healthy relationships, really understanding that relationships are on a spectrum. When I'm talking to our teens, I'm really explaining that, on the left side is like a green flag, thinking about all the green things that are in a good, healthy relationship. The middle will be things that fluctuate, and on the right-hand side is like those red flags, right? Things that are abusive. And so really understanding that we're always going to be fluctuating between the good and like the middle part, but when we get to those behavior problematic problems, that's when it becomes abusive. So really understanding that here when we're looking with our families or with our relationships with others, really understanding how that influences how we are with the rest of the world. And then with community, we're really exploring settings in our environments and where these social relationships are occurring. To also understand and identify characteristics that are associated with becoming survivors or perpetrators of sexual violence. So here's some examples are like the workplace campuses at St. Mary's, right, like other schools, and then our neighborhoods. And then here prevention efforts really look at like improving physical and social environments, right? Like I see a lot of community gardens happening in a lot of like neighborhoods, right? Other examples are like social environments to address how we can increase, better support in the communities where there's a high percentage of violence. And then our next one is societal. So with societal, we're really looking this broad, like general, like how society is playing now, which normalize violence. So think about like rape culture, how social norms and cultural norms really support violence, and then how we see them in other societal factors that can cause inequalities between groups. So here is where we're looking at intersectionality, right? Like we're looking at LGBTQIA folks, we're looking at disabilities, neurodivergence, BIPOC people. So we're really seeing how like, okay, we take sexual violence, but then we also look at identities that these people are coming from and how sexual violence is affecting them. And I mentioned rape culture just because we do see a lot how like rape culture, if we are familiar with the pyramid of rape culture, it really looks at how the bottom is like the normalizing attitudes and beliefs, and how as we keep going up the pyramid, actual penetration and violence against our bodies starts to happen. And here some examples for prevention will be changing and promoting those social norms, changing the attitudes that we believe, right? So a lot of things with like rape culture, we'll see ideologies of like hypermasculinity and how it's like really affecting rape culture. Here would be like changing these attitudes of masculinity and promoting more equality between genders, for example, or strengthening educational, economic, and policy structures, creating better policies that are actually inclusive and are actually, representing survivors. One of the things that I'll kind of mention later on is like in Chicago, we're starting this initiative where survivors are being part of this process of implementing better policies. So that's a better example, like what better to create better policies and for them to come from survivors that have actually experienced this violence, right? And then here's where I'll begin to kind of discuss the risk and protective factors. So risk factors are just any factors that will really increase our risk to facing sexual violence. These do not necessarily mean that it'll cause violence or that everyone will experience violence if you have, fall within any of these risk factors. But really thinking about how these risk factors can be individual, within our relationships, within our community and societal. So again, using that socio-ecological model. So again, risk factors are just characteristics that really increase our likelihood to becoming a person that's a survivor of sexual violence. And it really just helps understand that there's a very wide range of factors that people can face to become a risk factor. So with an individual, it'll be, again, if you already have a history with substance abuse or your family faces substance abuse problems, maybe you're have a lot of exposure to socially explicit media. So this example could be like our youth, right? Like the internet now and technology now looks very different from like when I was a younger kid, right? Like the things that I was exposed to then is like 10 times more to what our kids are being exposed to now, right? And so really thinking about like, yeah, we have parental guidance, right? But what are other like measures that we can take for our kids within social media to help, not get them really be exposed to all that explicitness that's on there. So an example is like TikTok, right? We see there's this influencer on Instagram and TikTok that I follow. His name is Barrett, and he really like exposes people who comment on kids' TikTok or like other social media comments, where it'll be very obvious it's a child who was like 12 years old just doing the little TikTok dance moves, and then it's like older grown men that are like commenting and saying very like sexually explicit things. So, that's an example of how our kids are being exposed online, right? Another example is, as I was saying, like hypermasculinity, right? These ideologies of like male dominance, of male privilege, how they really impact, just this superiority where like maybe they're entitled, or where like, violence is supposed to happen. Another thing is like men can be entitled about, not all men, right? Just some. But they'll be entitled about these ideologies to having sex with everyone. And then another example is prior victimization. So if you have been let's say a child sexual assault survivor, you could have a higher risk of, re-victimization as you become a young adult and an adult. With relationship, we're really looking at, again, this family history of violence or maybe substance abuse. Maybe you come from an emotionally unsupportive environment. So if our parents are not emotionally there as we're, when we're children, that can cause problems too. An example that there's a video that I'll use when I'm presenting about neurobiology, and we'll really look at how kids, even from infancy as babies, and again, using social media as an example, or like technology, where let's say I have a baby here and the baby is trying to play with me and get my attention, and I'm just on the computer or on my phone and really ignoring the baby or giving the baby more toys to go and play on their own. Like, we don't really think about that as negligence, but it is in a shape or form. So how that can produce like in like emotionally unstable households, where the baby will then, as they grow older in age, will internalize, okay, my parent doesn't want to spend time with me. They don't maybe want to learn about my feelings, so then I have to go and, and bottle my feelings up or not be able to talk about it with my family. So then let's say we do face sexual assault, then we internalize and realize that we can't talk about this within our families. But then we also have like cultural aspects of it as well, right? And then another example here really is poor parent relationships. So similarly, like, we don't have good relationships with our parents, so we can't go to them. Maybe if we disclose that we're a survivor, we'll probably get in trouble instead of getting support. The other two are intimate partner violence. So if we're already in an intimate partner relationship, they can definitely use sexual assault as another form to continue to, perpetrate violence against us. And then lastly is, again, this hypermasculinity ideologies, how they can really affect our relationships. Maybe we start to internalize it and we start to carry these ideologies with the people we're interacting with. Community, again, going back to maybe there's poverty within the community and it's very difficult to really, get money in. Again, this can be even broader, looking at like policies and funding within communities. We also see lack of institutional support from police or justice system. So I know this was kind of mentioned already as well, but if we already know that doing police reports are not too effective, then maybe I start to internalize and see like, I can't make my report because I know someone who reported and nothing ever came about it. Lastly is like a tolerance for sexual violence within the community. So we're in a community that we see there's a lot of sexual assault being perpetrated, and we hear about it, we see it, we're being told about it, but nothing is really being done to make it better, right? So again, we keep internalizing these ideas and thinking that it's okay, so we keep letting it happen and not really coming forward with our stories. And then within societal, this is really, again, accepting these norms of sexual violence, thinking back to cultural, to rape culture. There's another pyramid called the pyramid of sexual violence, which is amazing. It's slightly different, but that one really looks at like at the bottom, we're working our way up, but the bottom is like attitudes and beliefs like racism, homophobia, colonization, how these ideologies really go and influence more violence. And then at the top, we'll see like war, rape, gang violence. We see a lot of wars going on right now with like Gaza and Israel, right? Well, we see maybe with wars like this where sexual violence could be used as a tactic to, continue to perpetrate others. And here we go back to male superiority as an example too, where these norms, where they keep being normalized and keep being carried out through our communities and the rest of society. Really, how men are being predispositioned to think how they should be and act, right? And again, with this sexual entitlement, where some men may be taught to think that women have to owe them sex, right, and that they can't say no. Norms that support women's inferiority and submissiveness. So really thinking about maybe some cultural aspects here, where if we think about like in the Hispanic Latino community, like in media, we're really told to have to be submissive to our partners, right? And then like an example is like Sofia Vergara and like Modern Family. I always give her as an example where we have to be very submissive, right? But if we try to be outside of that submissiveness, what are we labeled as? Very loud, very arrogant, or like we start to get into these other norms of like what we are supposed to be. And then we also see here like weak laws and policies that are supposed to protect us against sexual violence. So an example we have is like in the state of Illinois, there's no more statute of limitations, but that's only with like forced rape. What happens when we have someone who faced coercion or manipulation and it wasn't necessarily forced rape? Then that comes to an issue where there's statute of limitations, unfortunately. Or maybe other like laws and policies that are not very like have gender equity, right? How these can continue to impact sexual violence. And then of course also having high levels and forms of violence within the rest of society. But when we also have risk factors, we also have protective factors. So these protective factors are the characteristics that will increase the likelihood of us not becoming perpetrators of sexual violence or survivors. So here we're really understanding, again, the wide range of factors that we're supposed to have to protect us and our loved ones. So again, here it's very similar to the social ecological model where it's individual, it goes to relationships, community, and societal. So our first one with individual, we have families that work through conflict. So if you're a family that, as you were growing up as kids, you really talked about how you were feeling, any issues that you faced in school or outside of school, like you all talked about it as a family. You probably really didn't see your parents argue much, or if you did, you really just saw them having more discussions instead of arguments. That'll really help a lot. Also having academic achievements, so having a higher education. For example, my parents only got middle school and high school degrees. They didn't really go beyond that. So for me, to be a first generation student, I'm getting my higher education where, through my major, it really helped me learn more about this in school, right? And then number 3 would be emotional health and connectedness. So really having the resources to go out and get mental health support, to connect with other people. If you come from a background in your family where they really talked about your feelings and communicated and did all of these, skills to help you be a better person, then when you're out and about with people, then you'll be a better person with other people too, right? So you'll be able to connect with others even more. And then lastly is having empathy and concern for one's action, how our actions will affect others. So again, if we have number 1 as the foundation of like having better support from our families, you see how it's really connected with number 3 and 4, where we can go out and into the rest of the world and really better interact with our peers, where we're actually being empathetic, having compassion, really understanding them as a person and how our actions will affect them. And then again, this is another section from the CDC. We use their technical package, so all of this is part of it too. But the CDC has a technical package to stop sexual violence, which is this graph you see here. And so it really starts off at the top where it says teach skills to prevent sexual violence. We also see how we can providing opportunities to empower and support girls and women. We see creating protective environments, support victims and survivors to lessen harms, and promote social norms that protect against sexual violence. So here is where a lot of intersectionality comes into play. We really see that in order to change social norms, we really need to kind of break down this to help create this change in our communities. So for teaching skills to prevent sexual violence, this would really be changing social norms through prevention programs like Green Dot, for example. I really loved Green Dot when I was at St. Mary's. Yay! And then we also see like other bystander approaches that, there's a wide variety of programs similar to Green Dot that we can also use. But another one is like mobilizing boys and men specifically. If we mobilize boys and men by, helping break all of this down to them, we can also help break down those stigmas that they're told that they have to live through. So an example of how to mobilize boys and men is coaching boys into men. It's an amazing program. Through work, we've actually been having the great opportunity to have some of their professional trainings, and they're so amazing. Like, they will explain what the man box is, and it's just literally how men are raised to think that you're within this box, and what it means to be a man is like, protecting, right? Being strong, being hyper masculine. And then when you try to come out of this box, what happens? You're told that maybe you're gay, or that you're very much like a woman because maybe you're more vulnerable and you care more about others, right? So these are some of the examples that they'll kind of go over, like how really being stuck in this man box is problematic when we are looking at sexual violence. And they have this amazing curriculum to help, go, like, it's a program that they implement with boys in like high school, and they'll get the coaches to implement this curriculum. So it's very amazing. I've talked about it to my partner like quite a lot, very often, because it's like so amazing. So I really recommend that one. The other example would be providing opportunities to empower and support girls and women. So here would be maybe individual skill-based learning, which is like a very important component to a comprehensive approach to sexual violence prevention. So here we're going back to social emotional learning. My first year after leaving St. Mary's, first 2 years, I was in education. So I was doing a lot of like social emotional learning with skills with middle school kids. So here is just literally teaching about empathy, compassion, how to regulate their emotions. And it's not something that we can only do with kids. Like, us as adults can work on it. Like, I work on it very consistently. Like, through therapy, which is something like, we think that social emotional learning we only have to do with kids, but us as adults, we can definitely work on it as well. Another example here is like teaching healthy and safe dating and intimate relationship skills with adolescents. So here, there's a program called Safe Dates, which is one that I use in my program. It's a curriculum, again, on like teach skills to youth and like high school students or even college students about like what healthy dating is. It also has like worksheets and like scenarios that you can role play with the kids as well. And another example here is like promoting healthy sexuality, so comprehensive sex ed, which I'll talk about in the next few slides. And then we have empowerment-based training for women to reduce risk for victimization. And create protective environments. Here we have just like really being able to create environments where social norms are being changed, where there's physical things to help create more protective environments. So an example that I'm thinking of, like at the university where I'll be getting my master's, like they have a lot of like, they'll look like poles, but it's like an emergency button if you need to press it down. They also created an app. They also have like this buddy system where like, let's say you need to walk somewhere, you can call them and then they'll come and meet you and walk you. They also have like a shuttle similar to here, like Blinky and like Campus Safety. So, these are some examples, right? And then we also have improving like safety and monitoring in schools. Also just modifications to what these may already look like. And really maybe asking support from students to identify like what else can be implemented. And then in the workplace, this can be like creating atmospheres where there's no sexual harassment, like policies, doing consistent trainings, and then like implementing better policies. In this next one, we have support victims and survivors to lessen harms. So this would be creating victim-centered services. So at the organization I come from, through the coalition, we're really told that all of our services have to be victim-centered. So similar to what was being said earlier, like I'll come in to the hospital and I'll present myself, I'll say my name, like what I do at the organization, and I give them all their options. And then the survivor will have to choose from their perspective, what is the best option for them to choose. I can't choose for them, right? Sometimes people will come and ask me like, well, what am I supposed to do? And I have to like reiterate, like, I can't tell you what you have to do. These are your options. What are you most comfortable with? Or let's talk about each option and what the pros and cons are for each option. And you choose and you decide how we can move forward. We also have treatment for survivors of sexual violence. So of course, having programs like mine where we have free counseling, free therapy, and it's not just for adult survivors, it's for young survivors too. We have legal and medical advocacy as well. Another example is treatment for at-risk children and families to prevent from like behavior happening, but also including like sex offending parents and families too. Our organization specifically, we don't work with offenders, but in Chicago there are organizations that will work with perpetrators and kind of do like counseling sessions and a program with them to better learn skills instead of like resulting to violence. If like let's say they have anger issues, like what are better tactics that they can result to. So there are programs out there that exist like that. Just because of the funding we get, the type of program we don't work with offenders. So here's where we're really getting into the work that I'm doing. Just very important to explain all of this first. So at our program, like I said, we get funding from the CDC. So our funding, and we also get it from our coalition. So through the CDC, we get the rape prevention education funding through the Violence Against Women's Act, which really looks at working collaboratively with organizations and other stakeholders to really do educational workshops with rape crisis centers and anything really related to prevention. Our partnerships are really listed here. These are some of them, but we work with the Northeastern Illinois University where I do a lot of presentations and outreach with them. I'll be presenting next week with them about like masculinity and like toxic masculinity and machismo. We work with Chicago Public Schools, which is a huge, difficult problem. Unfortunately, we're one of the largest school districts in the country, but it's also very problematic, which I'll explain in the next slide. We work with Healing to Action, which is an organization, and with them is where they're implementing and really using survivors to really lead out the strategic plan for the city. And then we work with Dominican University as well, our Bryden Park Neighborhood Council. And then the Office of the Mayor, they're the ones that implemented this citywide strategic plan to address gender-based violence and human trafficking. So I'm part of one of their subcommittees for the city there. And the committee that I'm in, we really look at creating alternate responses. So some of the things that I did recently was like speaking with law enforcement, like how can law enforcement better respond to sexual assault cases. Oftentimes we see them kind of making things a little worse at times, but really understanding that they need to be trauma informed and they need more training. And through this like citywide strategic plan, it's been a lot of work. It's been being implemented over the last 2 years. We recently had our mayors, a new person in office, so that has kind of slowed things down a bit too. But if you have questions, feel free to ask me. And then the role that I really take on is doing community education and professional training. So I'm the preventionist there. And I do a lot of educational workshops for the community. I run our 42-hour crisis intervention training, which really teaches professionals or just anybody who wants to learn how to do crisis intervention and become volunteers or interns with us. We really teach them the skills about like what sexual violence is, how it's really related to racism, the history of how the U.S. was created. But we also look at like crisis intervention in the hospital. We also look at working with marginalized populations. So it goes very deep dive into everything that's very intersectional to sexual violence. Sorry, that's supposed to say neurobiology, but I also do a training on neurobiology, like the trauma of sexual violence and how to handle disclosures when people are disclosing to us that they're survivors. And then here, the biggest thing is that I'm really pushing forward to comprehensive sexual health education. So how sexual health looks like in my role is, again, I work with Chicago Public Schools. I'm in their school health advisory committee, but CPS, like I said, can be very problematic. So they do have some laws, which I'll explain, but one of the laws that we have in the state of Illinois is Erin's Law, which is a survivor who faced sexual assault. And so through Erin's Law, it really requires public schools to provide child sexual abuse prevention education. This is from pre-K all the way to high school. This law really requires schools annually to teach children how to recognize child sexual abuse, how to equip them with the skills to reduce vulnerability, and to encourage them to report abuse. Even though we have the Erin's Law, we also have Keeping Youth Safe and Healthy Act, which this is a requirement for CPS to have like sexual health education that's taught within the in alignment of the national sexuality education standards, where it basically gives students information about healthy relationships, autonomy and physiology, puberty and adolescence, sexual development, gender identity and expression, sexual identity, sexual health, interpersonal violence. And this law really instructs that everything should be medically accurate with age and developmentally accurate, trauma-informed, inclusive for LGBTQIA plus individuals, and people that are parenting or parenting youth. And then the next two are for parents and guardians. They're very strict that there has to be at least 3 forms of notification sent out to parents or guardians. Of course, that would be so parents and guardians can opt out from these lessons. And it must be given 2 weeks prior to the start of the education, and they have to be in writing. And then the last one is sexual health policies, where they teach sexual health every year. And 2 instructors in the school have to complete district training. If it's a diverse learner school, there at least should be 1 special education instructor that has to be trained within that district training in order to provide sexual health. Within this policy, they can also get community-based organizations to come and present, which is part of my role. Last year, or over the summer last year, I got approved to teach in CPS through, like, I did the district training, but it's been very hard to get into CPS. Part of the difficulty with that was because a lot of schools, again, going back to just the reality that it's a large district, schools are really, what I've been finding is they'll email me to come in and do a 45-minute presentation about sexual health, and then that's it. It's just a one-time presentation. Or they really want me to do this in like between 30 minutes to an hour at max. And so the reality is I can't teach all of this in that time frame, or they'll email me just to meet compliance, and then it really defeats the purpose of actually teaching our kids, right? So with this initiative, I moved to charter schools. I did get to present to some charter schools this school year. Again, it's been difficult. My role has kind of changed as well. But with charter schools, it's different. Again, if you heard me mentioning Erin's Law, it's for public schools. So charter schools, since they're not technically, they run differently. They're not held to really abide by all these policies that CPS does. So they really run a little differently. And I've seen charter schools reach out a little more to me and be more willing to, let me come in and present a little more. So really, what I've been doing is I've been having these workshops where I'll come in and present on sexual violence, like what the types are, what the impact is. I'll also present on like rape culture, the pyramid of sexual violence. I love talking about like consent and boundaries, and STIs is like my favorite thing to talk about. So I really go in and like present about this and like healthy relationships. But oftentimes, like sometimes, conversations are good when they're like with our parents or caregivers. When it's with kids, it can really vary. Sometimes the kids can be, they think I won't know terms that they'll try to use, and then, they can try to be a little rude about it, but then I'll let them know, like, I was a kid once, I'm not much older than you, so I know the terms that you're using, and it's okay to use proper terms for our body parts. So I really try to change the stigma through, like, the education component. Oftentimes, like, what I really do to help my workshops is, like, I will disclose that I'm a survivor myself, and that really helps a lot of the parents to just, like, I really see how everything changes once I disclose that I'm a survivor, and they kind of just get like this, like, relief, and then they start to open up more, and we start to have these difficult conversations to help destigmatize, like, sexual assault in the families, for example. A lot of the presentations I do are specifically in, like, Latino communities, so, I really will relate to the cultural side of it too. Some presentations have been in predominantly Black communities as well, but I'm really kind of like all over Chicago, and like even outside Chicago, I will go and even present in Springfield at times too. And then all of this really has shaped me into creating my own curriculum. I really saw that myself as a neurodivergent, as a survivor, as a Latina, and someone who's pansexual, like, I didn't see myself represented in the curriculums I had. So we were using Second Step, which has, they're the ones that really has this curriculum for social emotional learning, but they also have a unit that's called the Child Protective Unit, which will really look at, like, how to teach kids about sexual abuse and how to prevent it and how to stay safe. But really the curriculum was just outdated. It was very much for, like, younger kids. Not really good for, like, my older kids who come from communities where there's a lot of violence or they're neurodivergent themselves, right? So what I did, I developed my own curriculum to be a series of 4 different sessions. That way I'm coming multiple times and really teaching in each session a different thing. So the first one is really looking at, like, healthy relationships, like, what are they, the relationship spectrum, which was what I was saying, like, we're really fluctuating. I will go and discuss, like, 10 signs of unhealthy and healthy relationships. I'll discuss dating abuse and the types, and really use the power and control wheel. And then the second session is, like, looking at rape culture and really connecting it with boundaries, consent, protection, social norms, normalization. Instead of calling people out, really calling them in, because when we call people out, what's, like, the first thing that someone may do? What are some examples? You get defensive, right? So when we call people out, we get defensive, and then when we get defensive, we don't hear anymore. We're like, what they're saying is just going in our ear, coming out, and we're really just responding to attack or to, like, protect ourselves and our beliefs, right? So really what I teach is, like, calling people in instead. So an example is, like, let's say someone makes a racist joke, right? And then instead of us kind of, like, awkwardly laughing because we know it's wrong, instead we could say, well, what was your intention with that? And you'll see how, like, that really will change the dynamic in the conversation, and then the person will more than likely maybe pause and think about what they just said instead of, like, getting defensive and, like, reacting. And I actually had someone, when I taught this, they later came to me and told me that they used this as an example, and that the person, they stayed quiet, and then the way they reacted, they said it themselves, well, like, I wasn't sure what I meant with that, I'm sorry. So, it's a small but very effective way to react instead of calling people out. I know we're really used to, like, this calling out culture. And then again, with this part of the second session, I also teach about, like, STIs. Again, it's my favorite thing to talk about. So I'll teach about STIs, contraceptives, abortion, emergency contraception, right? And then if time allows, like, I'm really, like, having this as example, to have examples or an activity for the students to know, and how to, like, participate in, like, scenarios or role play similar to this. The third session is really looking again at the types of sexual violence and the impact. So that alone is like an hour or over an hour presentation. And then the last session will look at how to stay safe, your rights for legal and medical advocacy, and then resources. And then what I really want to have here is like having an anonymous box where like everyone has the same colored note card and same colored pen. And like if you have a question, everyone will write something. If you don't have a question, just write like a joke or a fun fact about yourself, or just write how you're feeling, so that way, like let's say I have only 3 people here writing, then we're going to know it's only those 3 people that are asking the question, and it's more anonymous. So far it's been hard to try to implement this because again, schools are just trying to meet the compliance and just get me to come in once. So I'm really trying to continue to finish developing this and having others like me present it to others and others give me feedback and like things I can edit on, and then hopefully for the next school year I start implementing it. And then just lastly, really understanding again that sexual violence is a public health issue, is very intersectional with everything. We really focus on primary prevention, and in order to really decrease sexual violence, we need to have open communication and discussion. So this is part of it, having a symposium for this, and continuing to talk about like these difficulty things. I recently had a presentation where they contracted me at a school to go present about sexual violence, and it was for like it was adults. And then I had someone in the crowd ask. It was the end of the presentation. We got to like just talking about sexual health, and it was not necessarily sexual violence, but talking about sexual health. And then they asked, like, I thought this was supposed to be about sexual assault. And I said, it is. Like, it's all interrelated. We can't talk about sexual assault if we're not talking about sexual health. So really understanding, like, all of these are intersectional. Like, something with consent and boundaries is like, I often talk about my partner and how, like, my nephews are 3 and 4 years old. And, like, I don't know if you remember, but, like, the first day I like, took my nephew to go meet him, he ran to him, but then, like, he got up to him and he stopped. And then my sister and I asked him, like, how do you want to greet him? You can give him a fist bump, you can high five him, you can hug him, you can just wave. And like he chose to just, I think it was like fist bump at the time, but then like now it gets to the point where he sees him and he runs to him and calls him his uncle. So it's like, with all these things that we can implement in subtle ways with kids, like in small ages, all throughout as we get older. Like consent is not just within like sexual health, it's in every aspect. Like Maggie, I won't go up to you and just hug you because I don't really know you yet, right? Like I'll go up to you and ask you, like, can I give you a hug? Similar with Dr. Maggie earlier, I asked if I could hug you. Like there's like this is something that we can always implement throughout. It's not just like within sexual health. And then like first rape culture, for example, I really go and talk about like porn, for example, and like just all the things that we see in media, how they really will affect how we think, how we act. But yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out or just ask me right now. But I do have the resources that I use to really help create this is the CDC website on sexual violence. Specifically, if you look it up, for sexual violence, it has a whole series of information. It has everything I had on here, like just more in depth. And then the Stop Sexual Violence technical package is from the CDC. They're very amazing. It goes in depth about this part of the presentation that I went over, but it's very, very effective. Like I love using the CDC website. But this is my contact information. It's my work number, my email, my LinkedIn. I'll leave it up for a moment in case anyone wants to take pictures or note it down. Thank you. Are there any questions? We have 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So you work a lot in education, obviously. I'm just sort of curious. Nationally, we've been having a lot of issues with parents or people outside of the educational space trying to enforce what can and cannot be taught, especially regarding sexual education. So have you experienced any of that, or is your organization sort of working towards integrating it in a more easily accessible way to sort of combat that?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, so when I am going to schools, they're the ones that are taking in charge of like those parent notification letters so that they can opt out, which I always get sad about that because But like part of the here, like when I was talking about healing to action, the stigma will be that I've noticed some parents will think about like sexual or like sex ed and think like, oh, she'll come in to just teach my kid how to have sex or how to be protected. But that's not the reality. Like I'm coming in to do that and more, right? And so I think that's unfortunately a lot of the like stereotype and stigma that parents will have. With Healing to Action is one of our partners. With them, we're really pushing forward for comprehensive sex ed within Chicago Public Schools. So we did create like a proposal. CPS was not too fond about it, as you can imagine. So I think that's as much as that. Like it's been very difficult with that because it's just like CPS really understands that like they want to put it. They have like through the where did I put it? Through the school health advisory committee. They're really pushing forward to have sex ed like everywhere, but overall, you know, they still have to give parents that like option to opt out. Like I wish we could not have that because you know we teach like the reality of like sexual violence and it's not just like sex ed. But yeah, it's pretty difficult in that sense, and I think that's why it's been difficult to get into schools this school year so far.
With your work that you do with teens
Mhm.
in high school, have you found good resources that address using like phones and apps in a safer way when you talk about dating and regulations?
Yeah, so part of like when I'm going to speak to students about like healthy relationships, I personally have done my own research and will like integrate a little bit of everything to talk about it. But it is hard because I feel like it's just so advanced, but there's not still a lot out there about it. Like some of the things will be, for example, like I know with teens a lot is like, oh, you can't follow this person or you can't have this person or like kind of being manipulative in that way. But then the way I try to like debunk that and will tell kids will mainly be like looking at boundaries. Like, okay, your boundary starts and ends with you. Like, yeah, you may not want your partner to follow that person, but talk to your partner about like why is that an issue? Are they posting promiscuous pictures? Is their feed very like sexually explicit and that's what the issue is versus, you know, like being open about that and having more communication. I know the national, what is it called? The National Domestic Violence Hotline. It's a website, and they do have some information on like digital abuse. But through my role, I also talk a lot about, like for example, like sexting. Like I'll talk to the kids and even adults. I'll tell like it's not bad if you're sexting. What becomes bad is like who you're sending your images to and if they're taking advantage of it. So I'll talk a lot about sexploitation. And like, you know, a lot of AI right now that's going on. And I'll talk a lot about like hacking and blackmailing. We work with this organization called CASE, where we don't have lawyers in our organization, but CASE works pro bono with their attorneys. And they do take those sexploitation cases. If you don't know what sexploitation is, it's just like let's say my partner, I'm like sending my nudes to him. And he like goes and posts them on social media if we break up, or like let's say someone hacks into my phone and takes the images and like posts them on social media, or with this AI, like let's say, you know, we're going on vacation, I'm posting the bikini pic, like just posing like this, and you know, they make it look like I'm naked, like all of that is part of it. So Illinois is getting better at like having better laws within like digital abuse in that sense, but yeah, that's as much as I have. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much. I'm really glad to be back.